My name is Emily Thompson, and last Christmas dinner changed everything between my family and me forever. I thought I was finally bringing home the perfect fiancé. Jake owns a successful construction company, and after 3 years of secretly supporting my family financially, I was hoping Dad would finally show me some respect. But instead, what my father called me in front of Jake that night exposed a truth I'd been hiding for years. And honestly, my response shocked everyone more than his insult shocked me. Before I tell you exactly what went down at that Christmas table, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Trust me, what my dad called me will make your blood boil. But what I revealed about our family's finances left everyone speechless. But there's something about my family that makes me feel like none of that matters. I'm 32 years old and live in a cozy one-bedroom apartment in Westerville, Ohio, just outside Columbus, where I work as a marketing manager at Brand Forward Digital Agency. Most people would say I have a pretty good life. I've got a job I love and I've worked hard to build something I can be proud of. I'm the middle child of 3, which basically means I've spent my entire life trying to figure out how to get noticed. My older brother Marcus is 35 and works as a senior associate at one of the most prestigious law firms in downtown Columbus. He specializes in corporate litigation, and let me tell you, my dad Robert never lets anyone forget it. Marcus is what you'd call the golden son. Everything he touches turns to gold in my father's eyes. Then there's my younger sister Sophia, who's 28 and probably the most beautiful person you've ever seen. She co-hosts the morning show called Columbus Wake Up on our local CBS affiliate, and she has this way of lighting up a room that I've always envied. Sophia is Dad's princess, his little TV star who makes him proud every single morning when she appears on television screens across central Ohio. And then there's me, Emily, the one in the middle who works in marketing, which according to my father isn't a real career at all. I remember last Thanksgiving when I told the family about landing the biggest client in my agency's history, a regional healthcare system that wanted us to completely rebrand their image. I'd worked for months on the proposal, stayed late countless nights, and when we won the contract, my boss told me it was the best presentation she'd ever seen. I was so excited to share the news. Dad barely looked up from his mashed potatoes. "That's nice, honey," he said, then immediately turned to Marcus to ask about his latest court case. "Did I tell you Marcus just won a $2 million settlement for his client?" Dad announced to the entire table, his chest puffing up with pride. I sat there pushing food around my plate, feeling invisible again. It's been like this my whole life. When Marcus brought home B's in high school, Dad would celebrate like he'd won the lottery. When I brought home straight A's, I got a pat on the head and a reminder that grades were expected, not rewarded. When Sophia decided she wanted to try out for the high school cheerleading team, Dad drove her to practice every day and bought her a brand new car when she made varsity. When I worked 2 part-time jobs to save money for a car, Dad told me it was good that I was learning responsibility. I used to think maybe I just wasn't trying hard enough, so I tried harder. I got a full scholarship to Ohio State University, graduated summa cum laude with a degree in marketing and communications, and landed my first job at a respected agency right out of college. I thought surely Dad would be proud then. Instead, he asked why I didn't choose something more meaningful like Marcus, who was in law school, or more visible like Sophia, who was studying broadcast journalism. "Marketing," he said, shaking his head. "That's just making pretty pictures and catchy slogans, isn't it?" I tried to explain that modern marketing involved consumer psychology, data analysis, strategic planning, and creative problem-solving, but his eyes had already glazed over. He'd moved on to asking Sophia about her internship at the local news station. "The thing is, I love what I do. I'm good at it too. I've won regional awards for my campaigns, my clients see real results from my work, and my colleagues respect my ideas. But somehow, sitting at my family's dinner table, all of that success feels meaningless." Mom tries to bridge the gap sometimes. Susan Thompson works part-time as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm, and she's always been the peacekeeper in our family. She'll squeeze my shoulder when Dad makes one of his dismissive comments, or she'll ask me about my work when everyone else has lost interest, but she never stands up to Dad directly. I don't think she knows how. The irony is that I probably make more money than anyone else in my generation of the family, except maybe Marcus with his law firm salary. My marketing manager position pays well, and I've built up a solid freelance client base on the side. I've got good benefits, a 401k that I actually contribute to, and I've managed to save money despite living in an expensive area. But none of that seems to matter when I'm sitting across from Dad at family gatherings watching him beam with pride as he talks about Marcus's latest legal victory or Sophia's growing television audience. Jake makes me feel like the most important person in the room. When I tell him about my day, he actually listens. When I share my ideas, he gets excited with me. When I accomplish something at work, he celebrates like it's his own victory. He proposed to me last October during a weekend trip to Hocking Hills State Park. We were hiking to Old Man's Cave, and when we reached this beautiful overlook, he got down on one knee with a simple but gorgeous solitaire ring. I said yes, before he even finished asking the question. The engagement has been the happiest time of my life, but it's also brought up all these complicated feelings about my family. Jake is excited to meet everyone, especially my dad since they both work in construction-related fields. He keeps talking about how much he's looking forward to discussing the industry with Dad, sharing stories about running a business, maybe even finding some common ground. I haven't had the heart to tell him that Dad probably won't see his construction company as impressive. In Dad's mind, Marcus saves businesses with his legal expertise, and Sophia informs the community through television journalism. A small construction company, even a successful one, probably won't register as significant. But I'm hoping maybe this time will be different. Maybe having Jake there, someone who clearly sees my worth and loves me for who I am, will help Dad finally see me too. I need to tell you more about Marcus and Sophia so you can understand just how impossible it feels to compete for Dad's attention in this family. Marcus has always been the perfect son. Even as kids, he had this way of making everything look effortless. He was the kid who got good grades without seeming to study, who excelled at sports, without appearing to practice, who charmed teachers and coaches, and pretty much every adult he met. Dad used to call him his little lawyer, even when Marcus was 8 years old, because he had this ability to argue his way out of trouble with logic and charm. When Marcus decided to go to law school, Dad acted like it was the most natural thing in the world. Of course, Marcus would become a lawyer. He was born for it. Dad helped him study for the LSAT, drove him to campus visits, and bragged to everyone who would listen about his son, the future attorney. Now, Marcus works downtown at Henderson, Clark & Associates, which is one of those law firms with marble floors and mahogany furniture where the partners drive BMWs and take clients to country club lunches. Marcus handles corporate litigation, which means he represents big companies when they get sued or when they need to sue someone else. His cases often involve millions of dollars, and Dad loves to recite the details of every victory. Just last month at Sunday dinner, Dad spent 45 minutes telling us about Marcus's latest case, where he successfully defended a manufacturing company against a wrongful termination lawsuit. Marcus saved them $3.2 million. Dad kept saying, his voice full of pride. $3.2 million. My son saved them $3.2 million. I listened to the whole story while pushing roast beef around my plate, wondering when anyone would ask about my week. They didn't. Marcus has always been kind to me in that distant big brother way, but we've never been close. He's busy with his important cases and his important clients, and I think he sees me as his little sister who does cute marketing projects. He's never been mean about it, but there's this subtle condescension, like when he asks how my little campaigns are going, or if I'm still making those fun advertisements. It's not malicious, but it stings. Then there's Sophia, and honestly, it's hard to be mad at her because she's genuinely likable. She's one of those people who lights up when she walks into a room with this infectious energy that draws people to her. She's tall and graceful with Dad's dark hair and Mom's green eyes, and she has this natural charisma that translates perfectly to television. Sophia started at Columbus Wake Up 3 years ago as a weekend weather girl, but she was so good on camera that they promoted her to co-host of the weekday morning show. Now she interviews local politicians, covers community events, and does these feel-good human interest stories that make people smile while they're getting ready for work. Dad records every single episode. I'm not exaggerating. He has a DVR that's probably 80% Sophia's television appearances. He posts clips on his Facebook page with captions like, "So proud of my daughter," or "My little girl is changing our community one story at a time." His friends from the construction industry, guys who probably haven't watched morning television in 20 years, comment on these posts telling him how lucky he is to have such a successful daughter. The thing about Sophia is that she's worked hard for her success, and I genuinely admire what she's accomplished. She went to Ohio University for broadcast journalism, graduated magna cum laude, and worked at tiny stations in small markets before landing the job in Columbus. She's good at what she does, and she deserves the recognition she gets. But watching Dad's face when Sophia talks about her work versus when I talk about mine is like watching two different people. When Sophia mentions an upcoming interview with the mayor or a story she's working on about local businesses, Dad leans forward with complete attention. His eyes light up and he asks follow-up questions and offers suggestions. When I mention a successful campaign or a new client, Dad nods politely and changes the subject. Last Christmas, I brought a portfolio of my best work from the past year to show the family. I had campaigns for a regional hospital system, a chain of local restaurants, and a nonprofit that helps homeless veterans. The hospital campaign alone had increased their patient intake by 18% and won a statewide marketing award. Dad flipped through the portfolio for maybe 30 seconds. Very colorful, he said, then handed it back to me. Sophia, tell everyone about that story you did on the veterans shelter. I sat there holding my award-winning work while Sophia talked about a 3-minute television segment she'd done, watching Dad hang on every word. Don't get me wrong, Sophia's story was good and important, but so was my work. The nonprofit I'd helped had raised 40% more money because of my campaign, which meant they could help more veterans. But Dad didn't see it that way. In his mind, Sophia was informing the community and raising awareness about important issues. I was just making pretty pictures. The worst part is how this dynamic has shaped my relationship with both of them. Marcus and I are polite but distant, like cordial coworkers who happen to share parents. Sophia and I try to be close, but there's always this underlying tension because she gets the attention and praise that I crave. It's not their fault, really. They didn't ask to be the favorites, and they've both worked hard for their success. But growing up in their shadows has left me feeling like I have to work twice as hard for half the recognition. I remember my high school graduation where I was valedictorian and had earned a full scholarship to Ohio State. During the ceremony, when they announced my scholarship, I looked out into the audience and saw Dad checking his phone. He was probably reading about one of Marcus's college baseball games or checking when Sophia's dance recital was scheduled. Even on my biggest day, I felt invisible. That's why meeting Jake has been so transformative for me. For the first time in my life, I'm with someone who sees me as the star of my own story, not as the supporting character in someone else's success. When I tell Jake about landing a new client, he celebrates like I just won the lottery. When I show him a campaign I'm working on, he asks intelligent questions and offers genuine enthusiasm. Jake makes me feel like I matter, like my work has value, like I'm worthy of attention and love and respect. It's a feeling I've been chasing my entire life, and now that I have it, I never want to let it go. But I'm terrified about him meeting my family because I'm afraid he'll see what they see when they look at me. What if Dad's dismissive attitude toward my career makes Jake question his choice? What if watching Marcus and Sophia command the room makes him realize I'm not as special as he thought? I know these fears are probably irrational, but they feel very real when I think about Jake sitting at our dining room table, watching Dad light up for my siblings while barely acknowledging my existence. Still, Jake is part of my life now, and my family is part of me for better or worse. Christmas is coming, and it's time for these two worlds to meet. I still remember the exact moment I first saw Jake Williams. It was March 15, 2022, and I was sitting in Conference Room B at Brand Forward, flipping through my presentation notes one more time before our potential new client arrived. My boss, Rachel, had warned me that construction companies could be challenging clients, often more focused on getting jobs done than on marketing strategy, but I was determined to make a good impression. When Jake walked through our glass doors, my first thought was that he looked nothing like what I'd expected. Most contractors I'd worked with before wore wrinkled polo shirts and had paint under their fingernails. Jake was wearing a crisp navy button-down shirt, dark jeans, and leather boots that actually looked polished. He was tall, probably 6'2", with sandy brown hair and these warm brown eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. But what struck me most was how he introduced himself to our receptionist. He didn't demand to see the person in charge or act like his time was more valuable than hers. He smiled, made genuine small talk about her weekend plans, and thanked her for the coffee she offered him. When Rachel brought him back to meet me, he shook my hand firmly and looked me directly in the eyes when he said it was nice to meet me. Most clients, especially male clients, tend to address my boss first, even when I'm clearly leading the presentation. But Jake's attention was completely focused on me from the start. Williams Construction had been in business for 8 years, Jake explained as we got settled around our conference table. He'd started the company when he was 23, right out of college with a business degree and a dream of building something meaningful. They specialized in residential construction and small commercial projects, but Jake wanted to expand into larger commercial work. The problem was that their current image didn't convey the level of professionalism and expertise that bigger clients expected. As I walked him through our portfolio and explained our approach to rebranding, Jake asked the kind of questions that told me he was really listening. He wanted to know about target demographics, market positioning, and return on investment. When I showed him examples of digital marketing campaigns we'd created for other clients, he leaned forward in his chair and asked detailed questions about conversion rates and customer acquisition costs. Most clients nod politely during presentations and then ask about pricing. Jake was genuinely engaged with the strategy behind everything I was proposing. The presentation went so well that we ended up talking for almost 2 hours. Jake told me about growing up in Columbus, how his dad had been a carpenter and taught him to appreciate quality craftsmanship. He talked about his vision for Williams Construction, how he wanted to build a company that was known not just for good work, but for integrity and reliability. When he asked about my background, I found myself opening up in a way that surprised me. I told him about studying marketing at Ohio State, about the campaigns I was most proud of, about my dream of eventually starting my own agency. He listened to every word, asking follow-up questions and making connections I hadn't even thought of. By the time he left that day, I knew 2 things for certain. First, I wanted Williams Construction to become our client. Second, I was more attracted to Jake Williams than I'd been to anyone in years. We spent the next 3 weeks developing a comprehensive rebranding proposal. I threw myself into the project with an energy that surprised even me. I researched the construction industry, analyzed competitor marketing strategies, and created mood boards that captured exactly the image Jake wanted to project. Professional but approachable, established but innovative, trustworthy but forward-thinking. When we presented the proposal, Jake's face lit up as I walked through each element. The new logo I'd designed was clean and modern while still conveying strength and reliability. The website mock-ups showcased their best work, while making it easy for potential clients to request quotes and learn about their services. The social media strategy would help them build relationships with both residential and commercial clients. "That's exactly what I was hoping for," Jake said when I finished the presentation. "You get it. You understand what we're trying to build here." Williams Construction signed with us that day, and over the next 6 months, I threw myself into their account with a passion that went beyond professional obligation. I wanted to see Jake succeed. I wanted to be part of building something meaningful with him. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Within 4 months of launching the new brand, Williams Construction had increased their lead generation by 40%. Jake started getting calls for the kind of commercial projects he'd always wanted. The new website and social media presence made them look like a much larger, more established company. But somewhere during those months of working together, something shifted between us. Our weekly strategy meetings started running longer. We began grabbing coffee together to discuss campaign performance. Jake started asking for my opinion on business decisions that went beyond marketing. The first time he asked me out for dinner, I almost said no. Dating clients was complicated, and I didn't want to jeopardize the professional relationship we'd built. But there was something about the way he asked, so genuine and hopeful, that made me throw caution to the wind. Our first real date was at a little Italian restaurant in German Village. We talked for 3 hours about everything except work. Jake told me about his love of hiking and his dream of building a cabin in the Hocking Hills someday. I found myself sharing stories about my family, my college years, my hopes for the future. When he walked me to my car that night, he didn't try to kiss me. Instead, he took my hand and told me he'd had the best evening he'd had in years. He wanted to see me again if I was interested. I was definitely interested. Dating Jake was like discovering a part of myself I'd forgotten existed. He made me feel confident, valued, respected. When I told him about landing a difficult new client, he celebrated with the same enthusiasm he might show for his own business victories. When I shared ideas I was working on, he listened with genuine interest and offered thoughtful feedback. Jake never made me feel like my work was less important than his, or like marketing was somehow frivolous compared to construction. He understood that what I did required skill, creativity, and strategic thinking. He valued my expertise and wasn't threatened by my success. After 6 months of dating, I introduced him to my friends from work. They loved him immediately. Jake had this way of making everyone feel included in conversations, of asking the right questions to draw people out. My friend Sarah, who worked in our graphic design department, told me later that she'd never seen me so happy. When Jake met my college roommate Lisa during a weekend visit to Columbus, she pulled me aside and said this was the first guy I'd ever dated who seemed to actually see me. Not the version of me I thought I should be, or the version that might impress other people, but the real me. She was right. With Jake, I felt like I could be completely myself. I didn't have to downplay my achievements or apologize for my ambitions. I didn't have to compete for attention or prove my worth. Jake saw my value automatically, inherently, without question. The proposal came last October during a weekend trip to Hocking Hills State Park. We were hiking the trail to Old Man's Cave, something we'd done several times before, but this time Jake seemed nervous in a way that was completely unlike him. He kept checking his jacket pocket and stumbling over his words when I asked if he was feeling okay. When we reached the overlook at Cantwell Cliffs, Jake suddenly stopped walking and turned to face me. The autumn leaves were brilliant red and gold around us, and the late afternoon sun was filtering through the trees in this magical way that made everything look like a painting. "Emily," he said, and his voice was shaking slightly. "These past 2 years with you have been the best of my life. You make me want to be a better man, a better business owner, a better person. You see possibilities in everything, including me, that I never saw before." He got down on one knee right there on the cliff overlook, pulling out a small velvet box that held the most beautiful solitaire ring I'd ever seen. It wasn't huge or flashy, but it was perfect, classic and elegant, and exactly what I would have chosen for myself. "I love you, Emily Thompson," he said, looking up at me with those warm brown eyes. "Will you marry me?" I said yes before he even finished asking. I was crying and laughing at the same time, and when he slipped the ring onto my finger, it felt like every piece of my life was finally falling into place. The engagement has been everything I dreamed it would be. Jake and I spend our evenings planning our future together, talking about the house we want to buy, the vacations we want to take, the life we want to build. For the first time ever, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be with exactly the right person. But there's one thing that's been weighing on my mind lately. Jake keeps asking about meeting my family, and I keep finding reasons to postpone it. He's excited to meet my dad, especially since they're both in construction-related fields. He talks about how much he's looking forward to sharing war stories about running a business, discussing industry trends, maybe even finding opportunities to collaborate. Every time he brings it up, I feel this knot in my stomach. I want my family to love Jake as much as I do, but I'm terrified they won't see him the way I see him. What if Dad dismisses Williams Construction as a small time compared to Marcus's corporate law career? What if Mom makes one of her passive-aggressive comments about Jake's background? What if Sophia's natural charisma overshadows everything else in the room? But Christmas is coming, and I can't keep making excuses forever. Jake is going to be my husband. He deserves to meet the people who raised me, even if I'm not sure they deserve to meet him. The phone call that changed everything came on a cold Tuesday morning in January 2021. I was sitting at my desk at Brand Forward, reviewing creative concepts for a new restaurant chain campaign, when my mom's name appeared on my phone screen. Susan Thompson rarely called me during work hours, so I answered immediately, worried that something might be wrong. "Honey," she said, and I could hear the strain in her voice right away. Do you have a few minutes to talk? It's about your father. My heart started racing. Dad was 58 and had always been healthy, but you never know what could happen. I stepped into an empty conference room and closed the door behind me. "What's wrong with Dad?" I asked, already imagining the worst. "Oh, he's fine physically," Mom said quickly. "It's just that, well, his business situation has become complicated." I sat down heavily in one of the conference chairs. Dad's construction company, Thompson Construction, had been struggling since the pandemic started. Like a lot of small businesses, they'd lost contracts when everything shut down, and then supply chain issues had made materials expensive and hard to find. Dad had been putting on a brave face, but I'd suspected things were worse than he was letting on. "The truth is, Mom continued, your father's company didn't make it through COVID. He had to close Thompson Construction last month." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Dad had built that company from nothing over 25 years ago. It was more than just his business. It was his identity, his pride, his legacy. The idea of him losing it was devastating. "But here's the thing," Mom said, and her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Your father is too proud to let anyone know what happened. He's been telling everyone that he decided to retire early, that he sold the business, and is living comfortably off his investments." I closed my eyes, understanding immediately where this conversation was heading. "The problem is," Mom continued, "we don't actually have enough saved for retirement. Your father put everything back into the business over the years, thinking it would be his retirement plan. Now that it's gone, we're in trouble." How much trouble, I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. "We can cover our basic expenses for maybe 6 months," Mom said. "After that, we'll have to sell the house, downsize dramatically, probably move to a cheaper area. Your father would be humiliated. After 40 years of working to end up like this?" She started crying then quietly, and the sound broke my heart. "What do you need?" I asked. Mom was quiet for a long moment. "We've been looking at our options, and if we could get about $2,400 a month in temporary support, we could maintain our current lifestyle until your father figures out his next steps. Maybe he could find consulting work, or we could get the retirement account sorted out properly." $2,400 a month was a significant amount of money for me, but it wasn't impossible. My marketing manager's salary was decent, and I'd been building up a freelance client base on the side. I had some savings, and I'd always been good at managing my money. More importantly, this was my family. My parents had supported me through college, helped me get started in my career, been there for every milestone in my life. If they needed help now, how could I say no? I can do that, I told Mom. "How long do you think you'll need the support?" "Probably just a few months," she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "Just until your father gets back on his feet. You know how resourceful he is. He'll figure something out." I started transferring money to my parents' account the following week. Every month, $2,400 would disappear from my checking account labeled as a transfer to Robert Thompson. It was supposed to be temporary, just a bridge to help them through a difficult transition. At first, it felt good to be able to help. For the first time in my life, I was the one my parents turned to when they needed something important. Not Marcus with his fancy law degree, not Sophia with her television career, but me. Plain old Emily with her marketing job was the one who could solve their problems. Dad never acknowledged the financial support directly, but I noticed changes in his behavior toward me. He started asking about my work more often, seemed more interested in my opinions during family conversations. When I won a regional marketing award that spring, he actually displayed the certificate on the refrigerator next to Sophia's latest television appearance photos. I told myself the money was an investment in my relationship with my family. Finally, I was proving my value in a way they could understand and appreciate. But as the months passed, temporary started feeling more permanent. Dad didn't find consulting work. The retirement accounts didn't magically materialize. Instead of finding ways to reduce their expenses, my parents seemed to be maintaining exactly the same lifestyle they'd always had. Dad still played golf twice a week at the country club. Mom still got her hair done at the expensive salon downtown. They still went out to dinner every Friday night at their favorite steakhouse. From the outside, it looked exactly like Dad had planned his retirement perfectly. The story Dad told everyone was that he'd made smart business decisions over the years, invested wisely, and was now enjoying the fruits of his labor. He talked about his investment portfolio at dinner parties, gave advice to younger guys about retirement planning, and basked in the admiration of friends who wished they'd been as financially savvy. I never corrected the narrative. Part of me was proud that my money was helping Dad maintain his dignity. Another part of me was afraid that if I revealed the truth, I'd lose the small amount of respect and attention I'd finally earned from him. By the time Jake and I started dating seriously in late 2022, the monthly transfers had become so routine that I barely thought about them anymore. $2,400 disappeared from my account on the first of every month, and my parents continued living their comfortable retired lifestyle. I never told Jake about the arrangement. How could I explain that I was essentially funding my father's fake retirement? How could I admit that my family's financial stability depended on my marketing manager's salary? It felt too complicated, too embarrassing, too likely to make Jake question my judgment. Instead, I just worked harder. I took on more freelance projects, stayed late at the office to pursue new business, said yes to every opportunity that came my way. I told myself I was building my career, but really I was trying to stay ahead of the financial pressure that had become a constant background hum in my life. The irony wasn't lost on me. For the first time ever, I was truly valuable to my family, truly needed and appreciated. But it was my money they valued, not me. Dad's newfound interest in my career was directly proportional to my ability to fund his lifestyle. Still, I convinced myself it was worth it. $2,400 a month was a small price to pay for finally having a place at the family table, for finally being seen as the responsible, successful daughter instead of the overlooked middle child. I had no idea that $2,400 was just the beginning. The first additional request came 6 months after I started supporting Dad's retirement fund. I was working late at the office on a Thursday evening in July 2021 when Marcus called my cell phone. He rarely contacted me directly, so I knew something must be urgent. "Emily, I need to ask you for a favor," he said without any small talk. "I'm in a bind with a case and need some temporary financial help." My stomach dropped. I was already stretched thin with the monthly payments to Dad, and my own savings were starting to feel the strain. What kind of help, I asked carefully. "I have this major corporate litigation case that could make my career," Marcus explained. "The client is a manufacturing company being sued for $8 million, and if I win this case, I'll probably make partner within 2 years. But I need to hire expert witnesses and pay for court filing fees, and the firm expects associates to front these costs until the case settles." I sat back in my desk chair staring out at the Columbus skyline through my office window. "How much are we talking about?" $8,000, Marcus said. "I know it's a lot, but I'll pay you back with interest as soon as we win the settlement. This case is solid, Emily. I'm going to win it." $8,000 was more than 3 months of my normal savings, but this was my brother, and he was asking for help to advance his career. Plus, he'd promised to pay me back with interest. It felt like an investment in his future. "Okay," I said. "I can transfer the money tomorrow." "Really?" Marcus sounded genuinely surprised, like he'd expected me to say no. "Emily, you're a lifesaver. I promise I'll make this up to you." I transferred the money from my wedding savings account the next morning. Jake and I hadn't set a date yet, but I'd been putting aside money for our future wedding. $8,000 was a significant chunk of that fund, but I told myself it was temporary. Marcus would pay me back soon and everything would be fine. Except Marcus never mentioned the money again after that initial conversation. When his case settled 4 months later in a victory that got written up in the Columbus Business Journal, I waited for him to bring up repayment. He never did. At Thanksgiving dinner, when he was telling everyone about his big win and how it positioned him for partnership, I finally worked up the courage to say something. "That's amazing, Marcus," I said during a lull in his story. "I'm so proud of you. Will you be able to pay back that loan soon?" Marcus looked confused for a moment, then his face cleared. "Oh, the court costs, Emily. I thought that was just family helping family. I didn't realize you were expecting that back." The words hit me like a slap. Just family helping family. Like $8,000 was pocket change, like my financial sacrifice didn't deserve acknowledgement or repayment. Dad, who had been listening to the conversation, jumped in. "Emily, you know how family works. We all help each other when we can. Marcus will help you someday when you need it." I nodded and smiled and changed the subject, but inside I was screaming. Marcus would help me someday when I needed it. I was already helping everyone every single month, and nobody seemed to notice or care. 2 months later, Sophia called with her own emergency. She'd been offered an opportunity to audition for a regional television market that could launch her into national news, but she needed professional media coaching, a complete wardrobe upgrade, and demo reel production. "Emily, you're the only person I know who's financially stable enough to invest in something like this," she said, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. "This could change my entire career. I could end up on CNN or Fox News within 5 years. The total cost was $7,500. I didn't have $7,500. I'd already drained my wedding savings for Marcus, and the monthly payments to Dad were using up most of my disposable income. But Sophia was my little sister, and she was asking me to invest in her dreams. How could I say no? I put the money on a credit card and told myself I'd pay it off quickly with freelance income. Sophia promised to pay me back once she landed a better position, but just like with Marcus, the promise seemed to evaporate as soon as the money changed hands. The financial pressure started affecting every aspect of my life. I began working freelance projects every evening and weekend, taking on any client who would pay me. I said yes to rush jobs, difficult clients' projects that required me to work until midnight and through weekends. Jake started noticing my stress levels. "Are you feeling okay?" he'd ask when he found me hunched over my laptop at 10 p.m. on a Sunday night. "You seem exhausted lately." "I'm just building my career," I'd tell him. "I want to make sure we have a good foundation for our future together." It wasn't entirely a lie. I was working hard to build financial security, but not for the reasons Jake thought. I was working hard to keep my family afloat while maintaining the illusion that everything was fine. The requests kept coming. Dad needed $4,000 for dental work that wasn't covered by insurance. Mom needed money for car repairs. Sophia wanted help with security deposits when she moved to a nicer apartment closer to the television station. Each request came with the same promise: temporary help, quick repayment, family helping family. Each time I said yes because I didn't know how to say no. Each time the repayment never materialized. By the time Jake proposed in October 2024, I was living paycheck to paycheck despite having a good salary and steady freelance income. My credit cards were carrying balances for the first time in my adult life. My savings account, which had once been healthy and growing, was down to barely enough to cover 1 month of expenses. But my family seemed happier with me than they'd ever been. Dad asked about my work with genuine interest. Mom called me for advice about financial decisions. Marcus and Sophia both treated me like a valuable member of the family instead of the overlooked middle child. I told myself it was worth it. I told myself that being needed and valued was worth the financial stress. I told myself that this was what successful families did for each other. I was wrong about all of it, but I wouldn't figure that out until much later. Jake started asking questions about my family's finances in late 2024, around the time we got engaged and began seriously planning our future together. At first, his curiosity seemed natural. After all, he was going to marry into the Thompson family, and it made sense that he'd want to understand our dynamics. "Your dad retired pretty young, didn't he?" Jake mentioned one evening as we were looking at wedding venues online. "He must have had some really solid retirement planning to be able to stop working at 58. I kept my eyes focused on the computer screen, scrolling through photos of reception halls we couldn't afford. "Dad's always been smart with money," I said, which felt like swallowing glass. Jake nodded thoughtfully. "It's impressive. Most contractors I know are working well into their 60s, especially after COVID hit the industry so hard. He must have started planning early." The conversation made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't quite articulate. Jake wasn't being nosy or inappropriate. He was asking the kinds of questions that any future son-in-law might ask about his fiancé's family. But every question felt like a small betrayal of the secret I was keeping. A few weeks later, Jake brought up the subject again. We were having dinner at a restaurant that I'd suggested because it was affordable, though I'd made up an excuse about wanting to try their new menu rather than admitting that money was tight. "I was talking to my buddy Mike about retirement planning," Jake said, as he cut into his chicken. His dad was a contractor too, and he said the business basically collapsed for most small companies during the shutdowns. "Makes me appreciate guys like your father even more, you know. Planning ahead like that takes real discipline." I nodded and made some non-committal sound, but my appetite was gone. Every conversation about Dad's supposed financial wisdom felt like another lie I was telling the man I was planning to marry. The worst part was that Jake's comments weren't suspicious or accusatory. He genuinely admired what he thought Dad had accomplished. He saw Robert Thompson as an example of successful business planning, someone who'd navigated a challenging industry and come out ahead. If Jake knew the truth that Dad's business had failed and that I was funding his comfortable retirement lifestyle, what would he think? Would he see me as generous and family-oriented, or would he see me as financially irresponsible and dishonest? Jake's questions became more frequent as winter approached. He'd mentioned details he'd heard about the construction industry challenges facing small contractors, market conditions that didn't seem to line up with Dad's timeline. "It's crazy how much material costs have gone up," Jake said one Saturday morning as we were having coffee and reading the newspaper. "Even successful companies are struggling with margins. Your dad really timed his exit perfectly." I buried my face in the real estate section, pretending to be fascinated by house listings we couldn't afford. Yeah, he's always had good timing. But Jake's business mind was sharp, and I could sense him processing information that didn't quite add up. He'd ask casual questions about when exactly Dad had sold his company, what kinds of investments he'd made, whether he'd had to lay off employees during the transition. I answered as vaguely as possible, claiming I didn't know much about Dad's business affairs. But my evasiveness was becoming noticeable even to me. The breaking point came in November, when Jake suggested that we might want to ask our parents for help with wedding expenses. It was a reasonable suggestion. Many couples receive financial support from their families for weddings, and Jake had mentioned that his parents had offered to contribute. "What do you think about asking your dad if he'd be willing to help with some of the costs?" Jake asked. "I know he's retired, but if his investments are doing well, maybe he'd want to contribute to his daughter's wedding." I felt panic rise in my throat. The last thing I could do was ask Dad for money. I was the one giving him money. The irony of the situation was almost laughable if it hadn't been so terrifying. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said quickly. "Dad's pretty private about his finances, and I wouldn't want to put him in an awkward position." Jake looked puzzled. "Most parents want to help with their children's weddings if they can afford to. It's not really awkward to ask." "I know, but Dad's just not like that. He believes young people should be financially independent." Even as I said it, I knew how weak it sounded. Jake was successful and financially responsible. He would never burden his parents unnecessarily, but he also understood that weddings were expensive and that family contributions were normal and appreciated. "Okay," Jake said slowly. "We'll figure it out ourselves then." But I could see him processing my response, filing it away with all the other inconsistencies he'd noticed. Why would a daughter whose father had supposedly planned such a successful retirement be so reluctant to ask for help with wedding expenses? Why would someone who claimed to have smart investments be unwilling to invest in his daughter's happiness? That night, lying in bed next to Jake, I realized that my secret was becoming impossible to maintain. Every conversation about my family was a minefield of potential revelations. Every casual comment about Dad's retirement was another lie I had to remember and defend. But I still couldn't bring myself to tell Jake the truth. How could I explain that I'd been funding my father's lifestyle for almost 4 years? How could I admit that my family's respect and attention was essentially purchased with my monthly bank transfers? More than anything, how could I tell the man I loved that I'd been lying to him about something so fundamental to my life? Jake valued honesty and straightforward communication. If he knew I'd been deceiving him about my family's finances, would he question what else I might be hiding? Christmas was coming, and Jake was finally going to meet my family. I knew that spending time with them would probably answer many of the questions that had been puzzling him, but I wasn't prepared for what those answers might cost me. The invitation came during our traditional November family dinner at my parents' house in Westerville. Dad had cooked his famous pot roast, and we were all sitting around the dining room table when he suddenly turned his attention to Jake. "So Jake," Dad said, setting down his fork with the kind of deliberate gesture that meant he was about to make an announcement. "Susan and I would love to have you join us for Christmas dinner this year. It's time you officially met the whole Thompson clan." Jake's face lit up immediately. "I would love that, Mr. Thompson. Thank you for including me." Please call me Robert, Dad said, and I noticed the warmth in his voice that he usually reserved for Marcus and Sophia. And I'm looking forward to talking shop with you. It's not often I get to meet another businessman in the construction field. My stomach clenched. Dad talking shop with Jake was exactly what I'd been dreading. Jake knew too much about the construction industry to be fooled by vague stories about successful retirement planning. That sounds great, Jake replied enthusiastically. I'd love to hear about your experience building Thompson Construction. Starting a company from scratch and growing it successfully for 25 years is really impressive. Dad's chest puffed up with pride, and I watched him slip effortlessly into the role of successful retired businessman. Well, it was all about timing and smart planning, he said. Knowing when to get out is just as important as knowing how to get in. I spent the rest of dinner in a state of barely controlled panic, watching Jake ask thoughtful questions about industry trends, and Dad deflect them with the kind of general answers that sounded knowledgeable but didn't actually contain any specific information. The week before Christmas, the financial demands intensified. Dad called me on Monday afternoon while I was in a client meeting, something he'd never done before. Emily, I need you to send the Christmas money early this year, he said without preamble. I've promised to buy nice gifts for everyone, especially since Jake will be there judging our family's success. I stepped out of the conference room and into the hallway, lowering my voice. Dad, I can't really talk right now. Can we discuss this tonight? There's nothing to discuss, he replied, and his tone was sharper than usual. Your mother and I have commitments, and I need that money by Wednesday at the latest. But I was planning to use that money for wedding expenses, I said, immediately regretting how weak I sounded. Jake and I are trying to save for our future. Dad's laugh was cold. Emily family comes first. Always. We raised you, supported you through college, helped you get started in your career. Now when we need your support, you want to be selfish about wedding expenses. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. He was right, wasn't he? My parents had sacrificed for me over the years. The least I could do was help them maintain their dignity during the holidays. Okay, I said quietly. I'll transfer the money tomorrow. Good girl, Dad said, and the approval in his voice made me feel simultaneously relieved and disgusted with myself. Jake seems like a nice young man. Let's make sure he sees that he's marrying into a successful family. After I hung up, I sat in my car in the Brand Forward parking lot and transferred $3,000 from my checking account to my parents' account. It was money I'd been saving for our wedding photographer, but I told myself I'd figure something else out. That evening, Jake noticed my mood when he came over to my apartment with takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant. You seem stressed, he said, studying my face as we unpacked the food. Everything okay at work? I'm fine, I lied. Just tired from the holidays. Jake nodded, but I could see him processing my answer. He'd been doing that more often lately, paying attention to my responses, in a way that made me feel like he was gathering information. I've been thinking about Christmas dinner at your parents' house, he said as we settled on my couch with our food. I'm really looking forward to meeting your extended family and hearing more about your dad's business. My appetite disappeared immediately. What do you want to know about Dad's business? Jake shrugged, twirling pad thai around his fork. Just curious about his experience in the industry. Most contractors I know had a really tough time during COVID. Supply chain issues, labor shortages, contracts getting canceled. It's impressive that your dad was able to plan his retirement so perfectly during all that chaos. I stared at my untouched food, trying to think of something to say that wasn't a complete lie. Dad was always really smart about planning ahead. The timing is just so interesting, Jake continued, and there was something in his voice that made me look up at him. He retired right when the industry was facing its biggest challenges in decades. That takes either incredible foresight or incredible luck. Probably a little of both, I managed. Jake nodded slowly. I guess I'm curious about what kind of investments he made that were stable enough to support retirement during such an uncertain time. The stock market was volatile, real estate was unpredictable, bonds weren't paying much. It would be helpful to know what strategies worked for him. I felt trapped. Every question Jake asked was reasonable, the kind of thing any future son-in-law might want to discuss with his fiancé's father. But every question also highlighted the lies I'd been telling and the secret I'd been keeping. Dad's pretty private about his financial details, I said finally. I don't think he'd be comfortable discussing his investment strategy. Jake looked puzzled. Really? Most successful businessmen love sharing advice about what worked for them, especially with someone in a related field who might benefit from their experience. Dad's just not like that, I said, hearing how weak my excuse sounded. We finished dinner in relative silence, but I could feel Jake thinking. He was too smart and too experienced not to notice the inconsistencies in my family's story. I knew it was only a matter of time before his casual questions became pointed suspicions. That night after Jake went home, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out how to get through Christmas dinner without everything falling apart. Jake would meet my family, hear Dad's version of his successful retirement, and probably ask the kinds of specific questions that Dad wouldn't be able to answer convincingly. But what choice did I have? I couldn't tell Jake the truth without admitting that I'd been lying to him for years. I couldn't ask my family to change their story without revealing that I'd been funding their lifestyle. I was trapped in a web of deception that seemed to grow more complicated every day. Christmas was 5 days away, and I had no idea how I was going to survive it. Christmas morning dawned gray and cold with the kind of Ohio weather that perfectly matched my mood. Jake picked me up at 9:30, looking handsome in a navy sweater and khakis, carrying a bag of carefully wrapped gifts that we'd chosen together the weekend before. "You look beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek as I got into his truck. "But you also look nervous." "It's going to be fine, Emily. Your family is going to love me, and I'm going to love them." I forced a smile and squeezed his hand. "I know. I'm just not used to bringing someone home for Christmas." The drive to my parents' house in Westerville took 20 minutes, and I spent every one of them fighting the urge to ask Jake to turn around and drive back to my apartment. But there was nowhere to run. Christmas dinner was happening whether I was ready for it or not. Mom answered the door wearing the red cashmere sweater I'd bought her for her birthday, which she'd charged to the credit card I was paying off. She looked elegant and put together exactly like the wife of a successful retired businessman should look. "Jake, how wonderful to finally meet you properly," she said, giving him a warm hug. "Emily has told us so much about you and your company." Dad appeared behind her wearing his best golf shirt and the watch Marcus had given him last Christmas. He shook Jake's hand firmly and clapped him on the shoulder like they were old friends. "Welcome to the family, son," Dad said, and I noticed how he'd positioned himself in the foyer so that Jake would see the framed photos of Marcus's law school graduation and Sophia's television publicity shots that lined the hallway walls. We moved into the living room where the Christmas tree dominated one corner, surrounded by perfectly wrapped presents. Mom had outdone herself with the decorations, and everything looked like a magazine spread of the perfect American Christmas. "Jake, you'll have to excuse Emily's choice in wrapping paper," Dad said, gesturing toward the gifts I'd brought. She never had Sophia's artistic eye for these things. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. The wrapping paper was perfectly fine, just simple red and green stripes instead of the elaborate bows and ribbons that Sophia always used. But Dad's comment made it sound like I'd shown up with gifts wrapped in newspaper. Jake looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything. He was too polite to contradict his host, but I could see him filing away Dad's casual dismissal of my efforts. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later, bringing stories about his latest legal victories and expensive wine that he'd charged to the firm's entertainment account. He greeted Jake warmly and immediately launched into conversation about business challenges and market conditions. Then Sophia made her entrance looking like she'd stepped off a magazine cover in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She hugged Jake and complimented his sweater, and within minutes she had him laughing at stories about her morning show mishaps. Dad beamed as he watched his golden children charm my fiancé. "Marcus handles million-dollar corporate cases," he told Jake proudly. "And Sophia educates thousands of viewers every morning about what's happening in our community." "That's impressive," Jake said politely. "Emily's told me about their accomplishments. You must be very proud." "Oh, we are," Dad replied. "Marcus and Sophia have both built real careers that make a difference in people's lives." The emphasis on real careers wasn't lost on anyone in the room. I felt Jake glance at me, probably wondering why Dad didn't include my marketing work in his list of accomplishments to be proud of. Emily does marketing things, Dad continued dismissively. You know, advertisements and such. Jake's jaw tightened slightly. Actually, Emily's work is incredibly sophisticated, he said. Marketing strategy requires a deep understanding of consumer psychology, data analysis, and creative problem solving. The campaigns she's developed have won regional awards and delivered significant ROI for her clients. Dad waved his hand dismissively. Awards don't mean much in the real world, Jake. Marketing isn't exactly brain surgery or broadcast journalism. I watched Jake's expression change as he processed Dad's casual dismissal of my career and achievements. This was the first time he was seeing the family dynamic I'd grown up with, the automatic assumption that my work was less valuable, less important, less worthy of respect than my siblings' careers. Throughout the morning, Dad continued his pattern of subtle digs and comparisons. He commented on my outfit, questioning why I'd chosen that particular shade of blue when green would have been more flattering. He criticized my gift choices, wondering aloud why I hadn't put more thought into the presents like Sophia always did. Jake grew quieter as the morning progressed, responding politely to conversation, but watching the family interactions with increasing discomfort. I could see him noticing patterns that I'd accepted as normal my entire life, but that probably looked shocking to someone experiencing them for the first time. When Sophia started telling an animated story about interviewing the mayor for a segment about city budget issues, Dad hung on every word, asking follow-up questions and praising her journalistic instincts. When I mentioned that Brand Forward had just landed a major healthcare system as a client, Dad nodded politely and immediately changed the subject back to Sophia's television work. The breaking point came when Dad decided to share his philosophy about family success with Jake. You know, Jake, he said, settling back in his recliner with the air of someone about to dispense important wisdom. I've always told my children that there are careers that matter and careers that don't. Marcus fights for justice in the courtroom. Sophia informs and educates our community. Emily makes pretty pictures for advertisements. Jake's expression hardened. With respect, Robert, Emily's work is far more complex than making pretty pictures. She develops comprehensive marketing strategies that help businesses grow and succeed. Her expertise has generated millions of dollars in revenue for her clients. Dad laughed, actually laughed at Jake's defense of my career. You'll learn, Jake, he said condescendingly. Emily's always been our underachiever. Marcus and Sophia got the brains and ambition in this family. The room went silent. Even Marcus and Sophia looked uncomfortable with Dad's bluntness. Mom stared at her hands, probably wishing she could disappear. But Jake didn't back down. Actually, Robert, I think you're wrong about that. Emily is one of the most intelligent, creative, and hardworking people I've ever met. Any family would be lucky to have her. Dad's face flushed slightly, clearly not used to being contradicted in his own home. Well, Jake, you haven't known her as long as we have. That was the moment I realized that no amount of financial support would ever change how my family saw me. I could fund their lifestyle forever, and Dad would still introduce me as the daughter who makes pretty pictures. I could sacrifice my wedding savings and work myself to exhaustion supporting them, and they would still see me as the family underachiever. For the first time in years, I felt truly angry instead of just hurt. By 2 o'clock, the extended family had arrived for Christmas dinner. My Aunt Nancy Davis walked through the front door carrying a covered dish and immediately pulled me into one of her warm, genuine hugs. Nancy was Mom's younger sister, and she'd always been the family member who actually saw me as a person rather than a disappointment. Emily, sweetheart. You look exhausted, Nancy said quietly, studying my face with concern. Is everything okay? You seem stressed. Just holiday pressure, I said, forcing a smile. You know how it is. Nancy's daughter Rachel arrived right behind her, carrying her usual homemade cranberry sauce and looking effortlessly stylish in a burgundy sweater dress. Rachel was 28 and worked as a graphic designer for a marketing firm in Cincinnati. She was one of the few family members who understood and respected what I did for a living. Aunt Emily, Rachel said, giving me a quick hug. Mom told me you landed that huge healthcare account. That's amazing. I saw some of your portfolio online and your work is seriously impressive. Thank you, I said, feeling a rush of gratitude for someone who actually paid attention to my accomplishments. Jake, Nancy said, turning her attention to my fiancé with the kind of warm smile that immediately put people at ease. How are you handling meeting this crazy family? They're wonderful, Jake replied diplomatically, but I caught the slight tension around his eyes that told me he was still processing the morning's interactions. Nancy has always had a gift for reading people in situations. Within minutes of observing our family dynamic, I could see her picking up on the undercurrents of tension. She watched Dad dismiss my contributions to conversations, noticed how Marcus and Sophia commanded attention while I faded into the background, and observed Jake's growing discomfort with the whole situation. During dinner, Dad launched into his usual performance about retirement success and smart financial planning. He talked about his investment portfolio like he was Warren Buffett, describing market strategies and asset allocation with the confidence of someone who'd actually made millions instead of someone living off his daughter's marketing salary. Robert, Nancy said during a pause in his monologue, "I thought your business had trouble during COVID like everyone else's. Wasn't that a really difficult time for construction companies?" Dad's face tightened slightly, but he recovered quickly. "I planned my exit strategy perfectly, Nancy. Some of us were smart enough to see the writing on the wall and position ourselves accordingly." Jake leaned forward in his chair, paying close attention to Dad's explanation. "That's really impressive timing, Robert. Most contractors I know are still struggling with the aftermath of supply chain issues and labor shortages. What kind of investments did you move into that were stable during that period?" Dad waved his hand vaguely. "Diversified portfolio, Jake. Real estate, some municipal bonds, a few blue-chip stocks. The key is not putting all your eggs in one basket." It was exactly the kind of answer that sounded knowledgeable but didn't actually contain any specific information. Jake nodded politely, but I could see him filing away another inconsistency in Dad's story. Rachel, who had been quietly eating her dinner, decided to jump into the conversation. "You know, Aunt Emily's marketing work is really sophisticated. I've studied some of her campaigns for inspiration in my own projects. The way she developed that integrated digital strategy for the restaurant chain was brilliant." Dad barely glanced in my direction. "You creative types always stick together," he said dismissively. "Real professions require different kinds of skills." Rachel's face flushed with indignation. "Marketing strategy isn't just creative work, Uncle Robert. It requires data analysis, consumer psychology, strategic planning, and measurable results. Emily's campaigns have generated millions in revenue for her clients." Dad chuckled condescendingly. "Rachel, sweetheart, you're young. You'll understand the difference between real careers and creative hobbies when you get older." Nancy's fork clattered against her plate as she set it down firmly. "Robert, that's incredibly disrespectful. Both Emily and Rachel have built successful careers that require significant expertise and skill." The table went quiet. Nancy had always been diplomatic in family situations, but there was steel in her voice that I'd rarely heard before. Jake looked between Nancy and Dad, clearly understanding that he was witnessing a family dynamic that went much deeper than tonight's conversation. Dad tried to laugh off Nancy's criticism. "Nancy, you know I support all the kids. I'm just realistic about which careers have the most impact." "Impact," Nancy repeated, her voice getting sharper. "Emily has helped dozens of businesses grow and succeed. She's won awards for her work. She makes more money than most people her age." "How exactly do you measure impact, Robert?" I felt tears prick my eyes. It was the first time in years that anyone had defended my career and accomplishments in front of my parents. Nancy was saying all the things I'd wanted to say, but had never found the courage to voice. Marcus tried to diffuse the tension by changing the subject to safe topics like holiday travel plans and New Year's resolutions. But the damage was done. Jake had seen the family pattern clearly now, and Nancy had articulated what he'd probably been thinking all day. Throughout the rest of dinner, Dad continued his subtle pattern of dismissal and comparison. When I mentioned that Brand Forward was expanding into new markets, he immediately asked Sophia about her plans for career advancement. When Jake complimented the marketing materials I'd designed for a local nonprofit, Dad redirected the conversation to Marcus's pro bono legal work. Each slight felt like a paper cut small but cumulative. But what made it worse was watching Jake witness it all. He was seeing me through my family's eyes for the first time, and I was terrified that their perception might become his reality. Nancy kept shooting me concerned looks across the table, and I could see her growing more frustrated with each dismissive comment Dad made. Rachel tried several times to steer conversations back to topics that included me, but Dad had perfected the art of subtle exclusion over 32 years of practice. By the time we moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, Jake had grown noticeably quieter. He was still polite and engaged, but there was a thoughtfulness to his responses that told me he was processing everything he'd observed. I excused myself to help Mom in the kitchen, partly to be useful and partly to escape the tension in the dining room. Nancy followed me a few minutes later, carrying empty plates and wearing an expression of barely contained anger. "Emily, honey," she said quietly as we loaded the dishwasher, "how long has your father been treating you like this?" Like what I asked, though, we both knew exactly what she meant. "Like you don't matter," Nancy said bluntly. "Like your accomplishments aren't worth celebrating and your career isn't worth respecting." I shrugged, trying to appear casual. "Dad's just proud of Marcus and Sophia. They've both done really well for themselves." "So, have you?" Nancy said firmly. "You've built a successful career, you're engaged to a wonderful man, and you're clearly intelligent and accomplished. Your father should be bragging about you, not dismissing you." Before I could respond, Jake appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Can I help with anything?" he asked, but his eyes were focused on my face with an intensity that told me he'd heard at least part of our conversation. "We're fine," I said quickly. "Just finishing up." But as we walked back toward the living room, I caught Jake and Nancy exchanging a look that made my stomach clench with anxiety. They'd both seen too much today, understood too much about the family dynamic I'd been living with my entire life. And somehow I knew that dinner was only going to get worse from here. We were halfway through Mom's famous apple pie when Dad decided to have what he probably thought would be a helpful man-to-man conversation with Jake. He set down his coffee cup with the deliberate gesture I'd learned to recognize as the prelude to one of his pronouncements. "Jake, Dad," said his voice, taking on the patronizing tone he used when he wanted to appear wise and experienced. "I feel like I should be honest with you about something." Every muscle in my body tensed. Jake looked up from his dessert with polite attention, probably expecting some kind of fatherly advice about marriage or family traditions. "I'm concerned about your engagement to Emily," Dad continued, and my heart started hammering against my ribs. "She's 32 years old, works at some marketing agency, lives in a modest apartment. Between you and me, she's never really accomplished anything particularly significant." The room went completely silent. Nancy's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Rachel looked horrified. Mom stared down at her plate like she wanted to disappear. Marcus and Sophia both shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Jake's expression immediately hardened. "Robert, I have to disagree with that assessment. Emily is incredibly accomplished. She's built a successful career, earned regional recognition for her work, and demonstrates more intelligence and creativity than most people I know." But Dad was on a roll now, warming to his theme, with the confidence of someone who'd spent 32 years believing his own narrative about my inadequacy. "Jake, son, I appreciate your loyalty to Emily, but you need to understand what you're getting yourself into," Dad said, leaning forward like he was sharing valuable insider information. "Between us men, I need to be completely honest with you. Emily has always been the most worthless child we have." The words hit me like a physical blow, but this time, instead of accepting them like I had my entire life, something inside me finally snapped. 32 years of financial sacrifice, emotional manipulation, and systematic dismissal crystallized into a moment of perfect, furious clarity. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Stop calling me worthless when you've been living off my money for 3.5 years. Dad's confident expression crumbled immediately. His face went pale, then flushed red with what looked like panic. Susan dropped her fork with a clatter that seemed to echo through the sudden silence. "What are you talking about?" Dad asked, but his voice had lost all its earlier authority. I pulled out my phone with hands that were somehow completely steady, despite the adrenaline rushing through my system. "Jake, would you like to know the truth about Dad's successful retirement planning and smart investment portfolio?" "Emily," Mom said urgently, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please don't do this. Don't do what Mom. Don't tell the truth about how this family really works. Don't explain where Dad's comfortable retirement income actually comes from. I opened my banking app while the entire table watched in stunned silence. Dad keeps telling everyone about his brilliant retirement strategy and smart investment decisions. Let me show you what his actual investment portfolio looks like. Emily. Stop, Dad said, desperation replacing authority in his voice. This is inappropriate family business. Inappropriate? I held up my phone screen and began reading the transaction history that I knew by heart. What's inappropriate is calling your daughter worthless after she's been financially supporting your lifestyle for almost 4 years. I started reading aloud, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room. January 2021 transfer to Robert Thompson, $2,400. February 2021 transfer to Robert Thompson, $2,400. March 2021 transfer to Robert Thompson, $2,400. Jake's face showed complete understanding now. All his questions about Dad's retirement timing, his suspicions about the financial inconsistencies, everything was clicking into place with devastating clarity. Nancy was staring at Dad with an expression of complete shock. Rachel had both hands pressed to her mouth like she was trying to keep from gasping out loud. Should I continue? I asked, looking directly at Dad. Because I have 42 months of these transactions. That's $100,800 in monthly support payments alone. The math was simple enough for everyone to calculate, and the silence that followed was deafening. But wait, I continued scrolling through my phone. There's more. August 2021 transfer to Marcus Thompson, $8,000 for legal case expenses that he promised to pay back with interest. Marcus went completely pale. Emily, I didn't know you thought of that as a loan. November 2022. Transfer to Sophia Thompson, $7,500 for media coaching and career development that she said would help her land a better position. Sophia was staring at me with her mouth slightly open, probably calculating how this revelation might affect her television career and public image. I kept reading. December 2023. Transfer to Robert Thompson, $4,000 for medical expenses. March 2024 transfer to Robert Thompson, $3,200 for home repairs and car maintenance. Nancy found her voice finally. Robert, this is absolutely disgusting behavior. Monthly support payments total $100,800, I announced. Additional emergency expenses, total $15,700. Grand total over 3.5 years, $116,500. Jake stood up and moved to stand beside my chair, placing a protective hand on my shoulder. Robert, I had serious doubts about your retirement timeline based on industry conditions, but I never imagined anything like this. Emily has been financially supporting your entire family while you systematically belittled and dismissed her. Dad made one last desperate attempt to control the narrative. Jake, you don't understand the full situation. Families help each other. Emily was just contributing like any responsible adult child would. Contributing, I said, my voice rising. Dad, I don't live in your household. I have my own apartment, my own life, my own expenses. I've been funding your fake retirement while working 2 jobs and living paycheck to paycheck so you could maintain your pride. Nancy stood up from her chair, her face flushed with anger. Robert, what you've done to Emily is financial and emotional abuse. You've manipulated your own daughter for years while destroying her self-esteem. Rachel jumped in to support me. Aunt Emily, I had no idea you were carrying this entire family financially. That's incredible and awful at the same time. The most worthless child, I said, looking directly at Dad, has been the only thing standing between this family and financial collapse. The daughter whose career doesn't matter has been funding everyone else's lifestyle and career advancement. Marcus finally spoke up, his voice barely audible. Emily, I honestly didn't realize the money was a loan. I thought it was just family helping family. Just family helping family, I repeated. Marcus, I drained my wedding savings to help with your legal case while you never once asked if I needed anything in return. Not money, not support, not even basic respect. Sophia was still focused on damage control. Emily, can we keep this between family? I have a public image to maintain. Your public image isn't my responsibility anymore, I told her. Jake, let me introduce you to my real family dynamics. Dad calls me worthless while cashing my checks every month. Marcus builds his legal career on my emergency fund contributions. Sophia advances her television career with my savings, while they all dismiss my marketing work as making pretty pictures. Jake's voice was steady but angry when he spoke. Emily, I see exactly who I'm marrying now. Someone strong enough to financially carry an entire family while they systematically undermine her confidence and self-worth. That's not worthless. That's extraordinary. Dad made one final attempt to salvage the situation. Emily, you're making this sound much worse than it actually is. We've always been grateful for your help. Grateful, I faced him directly. Dad, you just called me the most worthless child you have in front of my fiancé and extended family. After I've spent over $100,000 keeping you afloat, you described my career as making advertisements nobody remembers. Nancy was shaking her head in disgust. Robert, I am ashamed to be related to you right now. This young woman has been holding your family together while you tear her down emotionally. I looked around the dining room table at my family's shocked faces and felt something I hadn't experienced in 32 years. Complete emotional freedom. The Bank of Emily is permanently closed, I announced, my voice steady and clear. Dad, you need to figure out how to fund your actual retirement. Marcus, handle your own legal expenses from now on. Sophia, finance your own career advancement. I'm done being your family's secret financial foundation. Mom started crying quietly into her napkin. Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. Sophia kept glancing toward the door like she was considering making an escape. But I wasn't finished. This isn't really about the money, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. This is about 32 years of emotional manipulation and systematic dismissal. This is about me finally understanding that my worth isn't dependent on your approval or your financial needs. Jake squeezed my shoulder supportively. Emily, I'm incredibly proud of you for standing up for yourself, and I'm ashamed that it took me this long to realize what was happening. Nancy walked over to me and pulled me into a fierce hug. Emily, honey, you are the strongest, most generous person in this family. What you've endured is unacceptable. Rachel nodded emphatically. Aunt Emily, you've been amazing. I can't believe you carried this burden alone for so long. As Jake and I prepared to leave, I turned back to address my family one final time. I want you all to understand something clearly. I'm not angry about helping family members who genuinely needed support. I'm angry about being manipulated, dismissed, and called worthless while providing that support. I'm angry about working myself to exhaustion to fund lifestyles you couldn't afford while you treated me like a failure. The room was completely silent as Jake and I walked toward the door. For the first time in my life, I was walking away from my family on my own terms, with my head held high and my worth finally intact. Jake took my hand as we stepped out into the cold December air, and I knew that whatever happened next, I would never again accept being called worthless by people who depended on my strength. The 2 weeks following Christmas dinner were unlike anything I'd experienced in my adult life. For the first time since January 2021, no money automatically transferred from my account to my parents on the first of the month. Instead of the familiar anxiety about making ends meet, I felt something completely foreign. Financial breathing room. Jake and I spent those weeks having the most honest conversations of our relationship. Sitting on my couch on a snowy Tuesday evening, I finally told him everything. How the monthly payments had started as temporary help. How the additional requests had escalated over time. How I'd been working freelance projects every night and weekend just to stay afloat. I was ashamed to tell you, I admitted, curled up against his side. I thought if you knew I was funding my dad's fake retirement, you'd think I was financially irresponsible or too weak to say no. Jake shook his head firmly. Emily, what I think is that you're the most generous and loyal person I've ever met. You sacrificed your own financial security to protect your family's dignity. That's not weakness. That's extraordinary strength. The phone calls started 3 days after New Year's. Dad called first, his voice strained and unfamiliar without its usual authority. Emily, sweetheart, we need to talk about this situation. Your mother and I are struggling without the monthly support. I let him finish his plea before responding calmly. Dad, you'll figure it out. You're resourceful and experienced. Time to put those business skills to work again." "But Emily," he protested, "we don't have enough saved for retirement. We might have to sell the house." "Then sell the house," I said. "Downsize to something you can actually afford. Plenty of people manage comfortable retirements without their children funding their lifestyles." The conversation ended with Dad realizing I was serious about the boundaries I'd set. Marcus sent a long text message 3 weeks later full of awkward apologies and promises to pay back the legal fees. I responded simply, "I don't want your money, Marcus. I want you to remember that your sister sacrificed her wedding savings for your career while you stood by and watched Dad call her worthless." Sophia maintained complete radio silence for 2 months before sending a brief email asking if we could keep the Christmas incident private for the sake of her television career. I didn't respond. But the most important change was in how I felt about myself. Without the constant financial pressure and emotional manipulation, I started sleeping better, smiling more, and rediscovering the confidence that had been slowly eroded over years of family criticism. My work performance improved dramatically. Without the stress of supporting an entire family while working multiple jobs, I had energy to focus on advancing my own career. In March, my boss offered me a promotion to senior marketing director with a significant salary increase. Jake and I started seriously planning our wedding this time, with a realistic budget based on what we could actually afford, rather than what remained after family obligations. We chose October 2025 for our wedding date and began putting together a guest list that included only people who genuinely supported our relationship. Nancy called me every few weeks just to check in and offer emotional support. She'd been horrified by what she witnessed at Christmas dinner and made it clear that she was proud of me for finally standing up to Dad's treatment. Rachel and I grew closer than we'd ever been. She started inviting me to dinner with her friends in Cincinnati, introducing me as her amazing aunt who'd overcome family dysfunction to build a successful life. For the first time, I felt genuinely valued by a family member who saw my worth without conditions or expectations. In April, Dad made his first real attempt at reconciliation. He sent a handwritten letter acknowledging that calling me worthless had been cruel and unfair. He admitted that he'd taken my financial support for granted and expressed regret for years of dismissive treatment. The letter wasn't perfect. He still tried to justify some of his behavior and didn't fully acknowledge the extent of the emotional damage he'd caused. But it was the first genuine apology I'd ever received from him. I agreed to meet him for coffee in May with clear boundaries about what kind of relationship we might rebuild. Dad looked older and more subdued than I'd ever seen him. He'd gotten a part-time job consulting for small construction companies and was slowly accepting the reality of his changed financial situation. "I'm proud of you, Emily," he said quietly over coffee at a neutral location. "It took courage to stand up to me the way you did. I've been thinking a lot about how I treated you over the years, and I'm ashamed of myself. It wasn't everything I'd hoped to hear, but it was a beginning." Marcus sent a check for $2,000 in June along with a longer apology letter. He couldn't afford to repay the full $8,000 immediately, but he committed to monthly payments until the debt was cleared. More importantly, he acknowledged that he'd failed to defend me during years of family gatherings where Dad had dismissed my accomplishments. Sophia never apologized directly, but she did send a congratulations card when our engagement announcement appeared in the Columbus Dispatch. It was a small gesture, but it suggested she was at least trying to maintain some connection. Our wedding day in October was everything I'd dreamed it would be. We got married at Hocking Hills State Park, where Jake had proposed, surrounded by 60 people who genuinely celebrated our happiness. Jake's parents had embraced me completely, treating me like the daughter they'd always wanted. His mom helped me choose my wedding dress, and his dad walked me down the aisle alongside my own father, who had earned the privilege through months of consistent effort to rebuild our relationship. Nancy gave a toast that brought everyone to tears, talking about resilience, self-worth, and the courage to demand better treatment from the people who claim to love us. Dad attended the wedding and behaved respectfully throughout the day. He didn't try to dominate conversations or criticize my choices. When people asked about his retirement, he gave simple, honest answers about consulting work and downsizing rather than fabricating stories about investment success. Marcus and his wife came to the wedding and seemed genuinely happy for us. He'd been making his monthly payments faithfully and had started defending me when other family members made disparaging comments about my career. Sophia sent her regrets claiming a work conflict, but she did send a generous wedding gift with a card wishing us happiness. As Jake and I had our first dance to At Last by Etta James, I realized that I'd finally found what I'd been searching for my entire life. Not my family's approval or recognition, but my own sense of worth and the love of people who saw me clearly and valued me accordingly. "You were never worthless," Emily Jake whispered in my ear as we swayed to the music. "You were just surrounded by people who were too insecure to recognize how extraordinary you are." Looking back now, I can see that standing up to my family was the best thing I ever did for myself and for my relationships with them. Setting firm boundaries forced everyone to confront the dysfunction that had been normalized over decades. Some relationships improved once the financial manipulation was removed. Others ended, but those were relationships that had never been healthy to begin with. Most importantly, I learned that my worth isn't dependent on other people's approval or financial dependency. I learned that healthy relationships require mutual respect and genuine care, not sacrifice and martyrdom. If you've experienced financial manipulation disguised as family loyalty, emotional abuse that masquerades as tough love, or systematic dismissal of your accomplishments by people who claim to care about you, I want you to know that you deserve better. You deserve relationships where your contributions are appreciated, your boundaries are respected, and your worth is recognized without conditions. Setting boundaries with family members isn't selfish or disloyal. It's necessary for your mental health, financial security, and personal growth. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for dysfunctional family relationships is to stop enabling destructive patterns and demand better treatment. Share your own stories of standing up to family manipulation in the comments below. Let's support each other in recognizing our worth and building healthier relationships. Remember, you teach people how to treat you, and you have the power to change the dynamic when you find the courage to demand the respect you deserve.